Okay, Rebecca. So, as I was telling you before we got on, I'm super pumped about talking about your research and your work, which seems to be about unpacking altered states and I would say a different setting than what most people do.
Mm,
All right. So let's
mhm.
before we get into that, how did you come to want to even learn about this information?
Right. So this project, I suppose, initially started 7 years ago, and that was when I first went to the Amazon. And I've always been interested in the Amazon. I've always been interested in plant medicines. Just as a child, I've always been interested in plants, and I thought it'd be an interesting place to go. So I had a flight booked to South America, and I thought, okay, well, now's my chance to actually go visit the Amazon. And upon Googling the Amazon, one of the first things that comes up is ayahuasca. And I thought, oh, okay, this sounds pretty interesting. It sounded intense from what I read. And I didn't want to read too much because, yeah, like I mentioned, it was pretty intense. So I thought the best way to do this would be to try it. So I kind of dove in, eyes shut, and what I found was something incredibly profound, and it wasn't just the medicine itself. So it wasn't just ayahuasca itself. It was the ceremonial construction and the people who knew how to navigate the state. So the ayahuasca itself was a great medicine, but the medicine itself is just, to me, it's a plant. But to know how to navigate that, that's a whole different field. And to have this knowledge preserved for thousands of years as well, that's a completely different story. So that tells me there's something really important going on here. So that started 7 years ago. And then from there, I went on to complete my university degrees. I finished my bachelor's and then I did my honors, which involved more field work in the Amazon for 3 months. So I was building off those connections once again. And then I did my master's on psychedelics as well. And now I'm doing my PhD here for a year. And it's all working with people that I've known for about 7 years as well. So between 4 to 7 years. So we've got a level of trust between us, which means that this knowledge can be shared with someone they trust as well. Um, so that's a little bit about how I suppose I landed in the current day of being in the Amazon today. And it was also important for me, if I'm being honest, and this is what I realize now, 7 years down the line, is it would have been quite difficult to just jump in straight away because the Amazon, even the conditions are quite different to regular life back in New Zealand. Like I have to get used to mosquitoes, or I have to be comfortable seeing snakes, so I've seen a few tarantulas. Like if I think about seeing that in my first year, that would have completely freaked me out.
Yeah.
But because I've been here for quite a few times and it's my fourth time in the Amazon now, I feel a little bit more used to it. I feel like I can navigate that space a little bit better in the physical realm, just the day-to-day life. So it's had to build up that way in my opinion myself.
The Amazon seems so mysterious to me. I mean, I think for anybody who's never been there, maybe you watch a documentary about it or you hear certain things and the lungs of the planet and the whole deal. But
Mm.
what do you take away from the relationship of the Amazon and plant medicine? What about that synergy makes it so incredible?
The first time I saw the Amazon, the river itself, so the Amazon's a big region. It's in Peru, it's in Brazil, it touches the bottom of Ecuador, it touches the bottom of Colombia as well. First time I saw the Amazon was I was flying over a plane and it was beautiful. And I saw it's like a snake, it's like a snake river. You can see its twists and turns. And there was a sense of awe that filled me. Like there was a sense of, wow, this is something that's beyond everything I've ever seen before. And the fact that this is completely natural, there's nothing constructed in this space. It, in a way, took me out of my own ego, you might say, as a human. It made me realize there's something bigger out there and there's something bigger that's purely natural. So for me, and this is what I've learned as well from talking to my research participants, the healers that I'm working with, is ayahuasca, it's a great medicine. Plant medicines are great medicines, they're wonderful, but it's also having that in the Amazon. So having that in the center of nature, like you said, the lungs of the planet, and being able to feel that strength that comes with nature, that that phenomenal power that comes with nature. Even when there's a storm here, it feels like it honestly sometimes feels like world's ending. I can't describe it. Like it downpours. It's
Yeah.
beyond anything that's human and it's completely natural. And in a sense, it makes you feel a little bit small, but then it also makes you realize that you can have that connection with that bigger thing. And it's a feedback loop that starts. And for me, it's very important to not only drink ayahuasca or drink these medicines and have these ceremonies, but also to have that connection to nature, because nature is such an integral part of these ceremonies and this way of. And for me in my own journeys, that's come with a lot of respect for nature, and I think that's greatly helped in my own healing.
Yeah,
Um,
most
yeah,
definitely. My journeys have
yeah.
only deepened my significance for nature whenever
Mm.
I've gone down the hole, and I mean it's one of those things though, Rebecca, it's like it's a truly alien experience if you've never even attempted it. Like it's hard to
Mhm.
explain, and
Definitely.
it's just different. But I want to jump into this discussion about altered states.
Hmm.
And when I was reading Michael Pollan's book and some of the other stuff, he was talking about how humans crave altered states.
Mm.
What is it about these altered states that we're always seeking as humans?
Mm. That's really interesting question. I also want to second Michael Pollan's book. I love that.
It's such a good book.
It was quite pivotal for me actually in my research career reading his book. It was, yeah, he writes beautifully. But
It does.
what are we seeking, I suppose, in these states? For me, the first thing that interests me, so there was this study, it was done in 1977 by an anthropologist, Erica Borgenon. And she pretty much looked at a bunch of societies, tried to get a global picture. And out of that, she found that 90% have some form of accessing an altered state. So to me, that number is pretty significant. 90% of societies have some form of accessing an altered state. So there's some sort of prevalence here that makes me think, okay, this is important. Otherwise, why are so many people doing this? So a lot of these states, from what she found, was they were used for healing, or they're used for transmuting knowledge. With ayahuasca, you have a myth from the Tucano people of Colombia where they say that ayahuasca came to them. It's part of their creation story, is that ayahuasca came to them as a way of maintaining a connection to the spirit world. And I suppose in Western science, the spirituality isn't so much included. But to me, that's still interesting to see that psychedelics are used in some way to maintain a connection, whether that's to another realm that's spiritual, whether that's to another part of yourself. Doesn't really matter to me. It's just maintaining connection to something else. It's almost extending past just the human, past just who I am today. I think, yeah. So for me, I think this interest with psychedelics, there's profound research that's been done now about the mental health benefits, for instance. What I'm interested in with my project is looking at the functions of ayahuasca. So I do acknowledge that it's an amazing mental health tool. It's also a great physical health tool, which I've seen with ayahuasca, in the sense that it can help with certain illnesses, especially gut illnesses, I've noticed with participants that come. And that's also part of the physical purge that happens. So there's some sort of connection here between mental and physical illnesses that I'm seeing in the ceremonies, but also other elements such as creativity, such as societal harmony. There's accounts, there's old ethnographies um, about ayahuasca being used, for instance, when there's situations of conflict. So if people aren't agreeing in a society, have a ceremony, talk it out. Seriously, though,
That's amazing.
like it's like consulting an elder, though. That's kind of how I see it. It's consulting something else that's wise. Have a conversation and then bring that back to your community. You don't want to live in disharmony. So yeah,
Right.
there's a lot of different accounts, and that's what I'm really interested in this project. Like with the psychedelic renaissance, it's great. I love it. It's awesome. I'm 100% here for it. But there's a lot of research being done on mental health, and I want to see what else is out there. What else can psychedelics be used for, and what else have they been used for? So let's do a little bit of a discovery into that.
Yeah. You said a lot. There's a lot there. I mean, there's just a lot there to talk about.
Yeah.
I think the connection to the spirit world. Okay, let me back up here. Man, it's just my
Uh-huh.
mind's exploding with the questions here. From your research and working with people in the Amazon, what was the primary purpose of ayahuasca and psychedelics in, say, our ancient past to have a connection to the spirit world, or were there other reasons for it beyond that?
So that is pretty much the crux of my research question. And this is what I'm investigating. And as I investigate more and more and more, and with the levels of trust that I've built, I'm seeing that there are more layers to this picture than I initially thought. So that reference to the spiritual world, that's a Tucano myth about their creation story. And often people will reference this. They will reference that ayahuasca does connect them to something else. It's also interesting as post-missionary, a lot of Catholicism has spread through Amazonia. There's a lot of religion here. It's quite heavy in that way. And quite a lot of the maestros as well are religious. So in the ceremonies, sometimes I see them invoking the Catholic priest and things like that. And to me, this moment's especially interesting because once again, it's maintaining a connection to something else that's divine. And ayahuasca is the vehicle. It's just a different thing that they're connecting to. It's super interesting, super interesting this moment. um, and now I think I've lost my train of thought.
It's easy to do that with this topic because it's so
Yeah,
profound and so
uh-huh.
big. You
It
know,
is. It's
it
huge.
connects back to something that's so much bigger and older
Hmm.
and
It is.
ancient than
Yeah.
us. You know, and that's what to me fascinates me so much about it.
Mm.
It's like who came upon this first? And what
Hmm.
did they think when it happened? They're like,
Mm.
whoa, like
Exactly.
what just
Yeah.
happened here? You know?
Hmm. Another interesting. I'll just add on something quickly. There is another interesting thing I find with ayahuasca is that it's also used as a knowledge bank. So if, for instance, if the maestro wants to know something more about a person's illness, for instance, that's something that he can ask ayahuasca for. If he wants to know more about particular plants and how they function, can ask ayahuasca on that, which is really interesting. If we go back to ancient stories on how ayahuasca, for instance, was first encountered, you might say, a common story that's told back to me is that it was the plants that told them. So there's this reference back to the ancient people in the sense that they had such a strong connection with the spirit realm that it was the plants that told them what plants to use and in what particular way. So with the ayahuasca brew, it's two plants, chacruna and the ayahuasca vine, if you're in Peru and most parts of Latin America. And these two plants have to be mixed in specific quantities to get the intended effects, that is a psychedelic brew. And it's quite specific. And I've always found this particular interaction quite interesting because you're in the Amazon jungle with so many different plants. How do you find two that work perfectly together in perfect concentrations? And also, both with the chacruna leaf and ayahuasca vine, there are different types of that. And only certain types of the ayahuasca vine work with certain types of the chacruna leaf. So it becomes a little bit more sophisticated once again. Um, yeah, that was a little tangent, but it
No,
felt
it's great.
important.
It's life. Life is tangents. It's just all
Life
about
is tangent.
life is a bunch of nothing happens the way you think it's gonna happen. It's all tangents and stuff. And
That's
I
some
just
real wisdom there.
right. I mean, it's all. I mean, hey, I'm gonna do this. That didn't happen. You know, like
Hmm.
I mean, did you ever see yourself doing this? I mean, a long time ago. I mean, maybe you did, but maybe not the exact way it's happened. You know,
No, not the exact way, definitely not, but I'm stoked that it happened. I'm
right?
absolutely stoked. Yeah, I
Yeah.
could not have asked for a better way for it to unfold. My first ceremony, funnily enough, I drank ayahuasca. First thing I saw was the Amazon in massive letters right above me. I kind of knew that I was going to spend a little bit more time here than initially expected. Yeah.
Yeah, it was obvious, right? Yeah.
Not quite in this way, though. It turned out a bit nicer than I expected.
I mean, I never thought I would do psychedelics ever. I mean, I'm the last
Really?
person that anybody that has known me for a long time, they'd be like, no way, no way. But now I'm like interviewing as many people in the field as possible. I love the journeys I take, but I think I'm very much fascinated by the ancient aspect of it. That's why I contacted
Mm,
you because I'm like, you know, this. I've talked to a lot of people who are kind of doing the current version of
hmm
it, which is more of your Western society. And while I like that, I think it takes out too much of the spiritual component of it, in my personal
hmm
opinion. And I think it's a spiritual plant to me in many ways. I mean,
hmm
but it feels like in Western society we try to strip the spirituality out of these medicines too much. And
mm.
so I'm curious what you think about that.
About stripping the spirituality out. Um, I think the first thing that actually comes to mind is one thing I strongly, strongly feel with the psychedelic renaissance and how more places are legalizing or decriminalizing
Hmm.
psychedelics is how important it is to have safety around these practices. And for me, when I think about safety, I'm not going to talk to someone who's just started. I'm going to talk to the person who's been doing this for a very long time and ask them for their opinion on how to safely navigate this.
Yeah.
And this is where I think the crucial role of Indigenous folk and the people who've been practicing this medicine for thousands and thousands of years comes into the picture. I'm not going to talk to someone who's just started. I'm going to go to the person who's been practicing for a long time, whose father's been practicing, whose grandfather's been practicing. You get the picture, right?
Yeah.
And this is where I think it's really important to include Indigenous people in this discussion. And it hurts me a little bit, if I'm being honest, with Western science. I feel like it has really started a very tunnel vision point of view where it's if we look at this, if we look at the brain, if it's working in this way, then this must be a defect and blah 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 blah. But like you said, it doesn't really account for the spirituality or maybe the subtleness or the little flavors of the experience, the little
Yes.
bits that need to be integrated a little bit more finely. It's quite clinical, which I'm not against. I just want to be I want to be clear on this. I do have a lot of respect for Western science, and I do think it has its place, but there's a softness that needs to come with it, especially with psychedelic science, and especially with how sensitive these states are. And I've seen it. I've participated at this point. I probably like at least 120 ceremonies of ayahuasca, and that's with about
Jeez.
15, yeah, 15 different healers across Latin America. So Colombia, uh, Peru, and Colombia and Peru. I think that's it. But anyway, so I've participated in my fair share, and I've seen how different healers work. And the level of subtlety in their ceremonies, the level of protection that they put, it's amazing. Like it constantly amazes me. It really, like they really know what they're doing. They know how to protect the space. They know how to navigate the space. Even when it comes to my own personal healing experiences, I've seen how they interact with me in that space. It's a very sophisticated technology that they know how to maneuver. And they've known how to maneuver this for a very long time. And they usually come from a line of healers who have been practicing this as well, with initiations starting at maybe 18 years old or even younger. So you have people even younger than that who are being
Wow.
initiated into these. Yeah, it's fascinating. I've seen children as young as 14 being initiated.
Whoa. And they're
Uh-huh.
taking it. They're taking it. They're imbibing this. They're
Tiny, like the
tiny
tiniest bit.
amounts.
Like I'm talking like drops, like the
Okay.
tiniest amount. It initially might start with maybe them just sitting in the ceremony, just hanging out with the adult, might fall
Yeah.
asleep at 10 p.m. And then later they'll take just a tiny bit. I'm talking absolute drops.
Yeah.
Like if for instance your eye took it, we'd have a very, very mild effect. But yes, so there is some ingestion in that.
Wow. That's incredible. This is what I wanted. I didn't know any of this. Like this is okay. Let's go back to this nuance. What do you mean by
Uh-huh.
the nuance that kind of the flavor that's added that indigenous people and healers who have learned this over many generations and centuries do differently than say your current society people administering it?
There's a there's a level of expertise, and this, if I'm being honest, this is why I'm so interested in ayahuasca, because I like a big problem. As a person, I like a big problem to tackle, and
Okay.
ayahuasca is
Okay.
a huge thing. um, so for instance, if we're talking about initiations, I'll start with initiation. So the average initiation practice is 3 to 5 years, and in this 3 to 5 years, you'll spend your time with one maestro or several maestros, and you'll be in the middle of the jungle. And you'll be in your ayahuasca diet, which means you won't be eating any salt, you won't be eating any sugar. Essentially, your diet is rice and plantain and fish. You won't be having any sex either. No oils, no fats, a very lean diet. And you'll be drinking ayahuasca regularly, like at least 3 times a week during this
Yeah.
process. So, yeah, it's a long process of
Wow.
initiation. So, I suppose the reason I'm saying this is that's how much training goes into holding these spaces well, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of knowledge that's behind the experts, and I call them the experts because to me it's amazing. I like to draw the analogy between perhaps asking a first year med student to do a brain surgery versus the very specialist profession, professional. Like
Yeah.
that's the difference we're having here. We're having discussions working in these spaces. The healer that I'm working with now has actually he's learned from about 16 to 17 different healers in different parts of the Amazon, and his diet was for 5 years no salt, no sugar.
This
Absolutely,
is
yeah.
wild stuff.
So
I'm telling you.
it's phenomenal. And so the subtleties is that he really knows this space, right? Like he has seen it. He's spent 5 years doing this, and since then he spent 40 years practicing. So there's a whole lot of knowledge that this man has.
Yeah.
And he's seen a lot of things happen in this space. One thing that really interests me is how mosquitoes don't enter the ceremonial space. So usually when we have our ceremony and where I'm staying now, it's a little hut. It's called a tambo, right? It's got four little pillars. It's got a palm leaf roof, but it's open air. And you're in the middle of the night in the jungle, so you'd expect some mosquitoes. But they don't enter the space.
Hmm.
And they've never entered the ceremonial space. No.
Huh.
Interesting, right?
I mean, what,
Yeah.
how do you explain that?
I mean, you'd probably have to ask him for that, but it's something
We'll
that's
ask him then. Yeah.
it's something that's always interesting. It's yeah, and I can feel it in the ceremonies. I can see how he works, and it's on the very subtle points of people's energy, and it's a very beautiful process. But it's like doing a very fine brain surgery, is how I would
Yeah.
describe it. Like, very, very fine. You have enough expertise that you know exactly what point to get to, and you don't need to destroy anything else on the way.
Yeah. Do you
Mm.
think that this um molecule medicine, I mean, there's different names for all of these things, the
Mhm.
psychedelics, um, was put here for us, that is meant for animals and humans and all life to experience it, to have a deeper meaning of their existence?
I love this question, Darian. I absolutely love this question. This is a great one. This is something I toss over in my mind quite a bit recently, actually. I think yes, I think it has great potential. With the going back to that two karma myth that I mentioned at the start. So ayahuasca was put here in this. It was put here to maintain a connection to the spirit realm, but also to show humans how to be human.
Hmm.
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 Interesting, yeah. Yeah. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I think it's very important. In some older societies, perhaps not everyone would drink ayahuasca either. So only certain people would, and they'd bring back the messages. Um, I think with the modern day and what we're moving into, there needs to be more scientific research, perhaps, on the interactions of different medicines, like pill medicines with ayahuasca, and also certain mental illnesses with ayahuasca. I'm always on the side of more caution with that, or to go to someone who really knows what they're doing. So, for instance, the master I'm working with, I would have confidence in him to know how to navigate that just because of his level of expertise. So it doesn't have to come from Western science, but it needs to come from some expert in
Yeah.
some way or another. I have a blog, so I have a blog and I write things as blog people do. And my most recent post was a bit of a roller coaster, if I'm being honest. But something that also interests me is what is the plant's intention? So what does ayahuasca get out of helping humans?
Ooh.
Yeah,
Huh.
because yeah, a common perception in the Amazon and worldview, you might say, is that plants have spirits or plants have their own personalities or they're able to act, they're agents. So I've always thought like, well, ayahuasca is great. Like, it's an amazing medicine. Thank you for everything you've done for me. But what do you get out of this? Like, just wondering what ayahuasca gets.
Hmm.
Hmm.
This is I never thought about that. I'm telling you, I've never even given that one thought. And I actually feel bad that I haven't. I'm like,
Oh.
I'm like, wait a minute, because you know it feels like a one-way street, but it's true. Like, if we're all connected, what are the plants getting out of it? What is
Hmm.
the do you have to believe that then, but in order to have that conversation, you kind of have to think that plants have spirit and that they have a certain level of sentience. I mean, we know this now. We know this through
Hmm.
trees and the
Hmm.
communication systems and the emotions and feelings. We're starting to know that these life forms are much more, they're higher level than we thought.
Hmm.
So what are they getting out of it? I can't even imagine. Like
For sure, yeah.
I can't even imagine that conversation. You said something to me I can't even like process right now.
It's
It's
all
too
good.
wild.
Just let that burn away in the
I'll let
back
it think
for a
about that.
bit. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the conclusion, the place where I'm sitting with that conversation now, and sometimes it's just like trying on a hat, right? To me, I find it fun to try on a different hat, just a different way of thinking, see what that feels like. And where I'm at now is that ayahuasca does get something out of this because if we come back to the experience and the effect and the respect for nature that we get, does ayahuasca also not get humans to have respect for nature? And are we then not somewhat inclined to protect nature in some way, shape, or form? It's a bit sad that we're at the point where we're at with nature right now. I find
Yeah.
that very sad. But that's kind of where I'm sitting with that. But I'm letting this one tick away in the back of
Yeah, I
my
gotta let
head
that
for a
sit
bit
too,
longer.
man. It's
Yeah,
you just blew my mind with that one. I was like, wait a
yeah.
minute, why haven't I thought about this? Like maybe it is so that you will respect. Actually, if I think about it, let me really think about it. I had almost zero
Okay.
respect for nature before
Mm,
I did my first psychedelic journey. And I don't know why. Maybe it just wasn't there for me. And then
mm.
afterwards, I was like hypersensitive to nature.
Wow.
And now it's like I have just like such a huge respect for how
Hmm.
small I am in nature. And
Mm.
so maybe that's, the plant taught me that I need to respect it and respect that I am not the center of the universe. I am just, I'm a piece of this larger puzzle of life.
Mm. A very important piece. Like every
Yes,
piece
most
I find
definitely.
very important. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, it's just, but it just makes me think like people seek out altered states that are not plant medicine. And
Mm.
so going back to that, I think that this altered state discussion is something that I think is central to humanity, is that we're
Hmm.
almost closed off by our non we're closed off by reality, and some weird mechanism closes us off to a lot of the things that are larger than us. And we often
Hmm.
need a key or something, a gateway to get us to a different port or a different aspect of life or reality. That's where I
Mm.
think there's a big part of this, is that they're reality busters.
Mm.
This
Hmm.
medicine, it busts the simulation that you're in, potentially, that
Hmm.
you may be in. It's kind of like the Truman Show in that movie. It's like you just thought he was in this thing, and all of a sudden it's like there's something else out there. That's what I feel about it,
Yeah.
like.
Uh-huh. Eye openers for sure, or experience openers.
Yeah, I mean, I questioned my reality hard, and the first time I did, like
Good.
I was like, is this what was this just a curtain? Like what was this? Like
Mm.
there's a different side to this. Like I question it hard. I'm like, what's real? Like what's not? I was tripping hard. Like, but I think it's good to question your reality. I really do.
100%, yeah. I think if you can question it and still maintain the point of view that you started with, that means that point of view is strong. And if it changes, that's fine. It needed to anyways.
If it changes, fine. It needed to anyways.
But no, I'm serious. If you still have that same point of view that you went in with, that's great.
Yeah.
That's solid. But everything changes. That's the
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
What's been the most profound part of this study that you're currently going through?
I the first thing actually that came to mind was intimacy, and it was yeah, and my participants, so the healers, and there's this intimacy, there's this trust that we've built.
Mm,
I don't know if you've come across this, but North Star did an ethics pledge in 2020, and it was for anyone in the field of psychedelic research, who wanted to have their morals correct, right? And we're creating psychedelic science, and psychedelic science is beautiful. It's new and it's opening, it's flourishing, so we can put in so many different intentions and so many different beautiful moral frameworks when we're creating something new. So they created this, and I think one of the first things they say is that change moves at the speed of trust. And that's something I've noticed over these 7 years is the maestro I'm working with, he's phenomenal at what he does. I've mentioned his level of experience, but it's the level of trust and the ongoing friendship that we have, and not just with him, with his family, with his mom, with his daughters, with their children. Like it's a whole interaction there. And this has really led to good research for me. This has really led to a very intimate relationship where we can share ideas, where he's comfortable sharing information with me. I currently have quite a bit of data, and what we'll be doing before I write my thesis, or before I formally write my thesis, is we'll sit through and we'll go through all the data and go through what's actually appropriate to share, or what's perhaps more traditional knowledge that needs to be kept a little bit more discreet. Um, because it is quite intimate what you're sharing. And it's also that part of the community that's spiritual knowledge. That's almost like the little heart of the community. That's most sacred of anything. So for me, it's that intimacy of knowing someone for so long, knowing someone's environment for so long, and reaching this place where they feel comfortable to share that with me, and they feel happy to actually endorse the research project, which is what I liked when I first came back here. And the last trip I had, I was here for 3 months. I did a small research project, but this time I was like, I'm actually here for a year. This is what I want to do. And he fully welcomed it and supported it. So to have every stakeholder on board completely, and we know about Indigenous oppression, we know how bad it's been, we know
Right.
how much knowledge has been stolen. So to have someone on board who's actually happy and trusts me as a researcher to go forward in a good way, that to me has probably been the best part of this project, and also the most valuable part. This project never would have happened, or I won't be getting the data and information I'm getting now if I didn't have that experience and trust. And so it's a long process, I guess, in that way. And it will only keep getting better, but it's been a process to set that up. So I'm lucky to be in the place now where I can actually, enjoy it. I mean, it's always been enjoyable, but
Yeah.
it's nice to see the product in the present day of all that time spent in the past.
I feel like what you're doing is so important. Like, and this conversation with you, I think, is very different than the other conversations I've had with other people in the psychedelic space, because it's truly an indigenous conversation about this.
Mm.
It's a more of an ancient conversation that is occurring in current times,
Mm-hmm.
type of thing. It's wild, man. It's really wild. Like I'm always getting kind of the current, which is great, about,
Mm-hmm.
decriminalization, legalization in different states, the United States. This is all good, all wonderful. But this is what I was looking for too, is that this kind of ancient indigenous gap, or kind of direct
Mm.
mechanism, that I think most people I talk to, they just haven't had that. They haven't had
Mm-hmm.
like your deeply interwoven experience with healers, ancient healers like
Mm.
this. And I think we gotta like pull these two spectrums together, type of
100%.
thing.
Yeah.
We gotta like pull them together, because there's all these forces in the psychedelic world and all these things. We gotta pull it together, I feel like,
Mm.
with that. But I wanted to ask, here's another question.
Mm-hmm.
What does it say maybe about the larger society, that this topic is becoming explosive and more people are seeking ayahuasca, ibogaine, they're seeking
Mm.
psilocybin, MDMA? What is it that is now awakening people? Why are people more awakened now to this more than ever?
I think the reason people seek something is because they don't have something. If you have everything, you're not going to seek anything. Um,
Man, you're just a
so
knowledge dropper. You know that? Just gem popping knowledge. Tell you what.
no, but seriously, like I think it's a reflection of where we're at in society. We're in a hurt society. I feel that. I feel that. I look at what's happening to the world and I'm hurt. It hurts me. It really does. And I think a lot of people feel that, and I think we have a lot of pain within ourselves as well. And that's why we're seeking healing. We're seeking some sort of, or perhaps we're even seeking meaning, because there's a part of society. I think you mentioned this earlier with Western science not having spirituality. I want to extend that to Western society not really having spirituality, or current day Western society not having
Yeah.
spirituality. Like there's a hole. There's something there that needs something that I think as humans we know there's something a bit deeper, a little bit nuanced, a little bit more. It's it's like putting the garnish on a dish.
Yeah.
We know that the garnish can be there, but it's just not it's not always available, readily
Yeah.
available. So I think people are looking somewhere else. Um, I think with ayahuasca, because I think people looking for ayahuasca, that's quite interesting because that comes with a few different prongs. First prong is that that's great, firstly, to develop relationships with indigenous culture, like direct relationships, if people are actually able to come over, and then like there's a cultural exchange, which I find really important. So yeah, you have your ceremony, but also how do people live? Like how do people who drink ayahuasca live? What's that community look like? What can you take home from what you see in that society? You know? Like what do you like? But then also on the other hand, it's a business, right? It's a money business. And then when money gets involved, and this is what the maestros here have told me as well, there's a lot of fake shamans. There's a lot of fake shamans out there,
Wow.
a lot. So as I mentioned, I've drunk with about 15-ish people in my time here. And out of that, in the current day, I'd probably recommend two. Yeah. So there's a lot of, yeah, it's and the people that I wouldn't recommend, it's not that they're looking for money or anything, it's just level of expertise once again. So yeah, you just have your specialists and then people
Yeah.
who
I mean, it's like
maybe aren't
anything like that's
specialized.
taking off. Anything that takes
Uh-huh.
off, people are trying to capitalize on it.
Yeah,
And whether they have, whether they're trying to sell something that they don't really know about, anything that is getting big, somebody's going to try to capitalize on it.
100%.
That's just life. It's
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately that happens with that. And I think when you going back to what you said about, Western society, I think people are shedding, they're shedding organized religion, but
Mm,
they're not shedding their belief in something greater or
mm-hmm.
something spiritual. I think a lot of research has indicated that, there's certainly a very large decrease in organized religion membership and attendance in places of worship, but that people's belief in higher power is just as high as it's ever been. So people are
Mm,
seeking. They
mm-hmm.
just don't want to be seeking things that are seem antiquated and very restrictive, and honestly that may not be very truthful in many
Mm-hmm.
ways for that. So I think this burgeoning aspect of like psychedelics is just another way for humans to connect, to how you said, to learn how to be human. That like blew my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was like, wait a minute. Like, wait a minute. Again, I didn't think about that.
Yeah, I guess, and also kind of, if we're going back to that Tucano myth, which really seems to be taking stage here today, psychedelics is a way of connecting with something greater, with
Yes.
something, or reminding us of that connection of something else. So
Yeah.
in a sense, putting humans in their place, but not in a bad way, just in
Yeah.
a gentle nudge, like you would with a kid, like just a gentle
Yeah.
hand holding, and this is your space.
What has it
Yeah.
taught you about, what is the lessons about being human have ayahuasca taught you?
Um, hmm. Fear is an illusion.
Ooh.
Yeah. There's a difference between feeling fear and danger, but chances are it's probably an illusion. Um, hmm. This one is a really interesting one that I've got a few pots boiling in my head. So if you picture my head, it's a stove and I've got a few back burners there. And, um, yeah, this one's, how would I word it? Mm, I might come back to that one. But respect for sure. Respect in that we're custodians of the earth and that we're put here to look after nature. But also nature's put here to look after us, and it's a loop, and it's nice, and it can go both ways. And one thing I think probably my hook with ayahuasca was, yes, the ceremonies were amazing. Yes, I felt the benefits, worked well with my system. It was my first psychedelic actually, which is quite funny because
Yeah.
yeah, I really went for it with
You
that
really
one.
did. Yeah.
I know. know, yeah. And it was right in the middle of the Amazon. And I remember when I drank it for the first time, I was like, wow, you've done some things in your life, but this is definitely one of the most interesting.
Yes.
Um, yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, it's an interesting
You know
one.
what's funny? You have so much knowledge. Like everything you say is dripping with knowledge and dripping with these incredible phrases. And I'm sitting there thinking, how much has she done of this? Oh my
A
God.
lot.
But you
Actually, not a lot. I can't even say I've done a lot. I said
yeah.
that to someone the other day, and it was the maestro's brother, and he was like, "How many ceremonies have you done?" I was like, "Oh, like a few. I've done it a few, like 120-ish." And then I remembered who I was talking to. I was like, "That's nothing. That's nothing compared to you." um, Yeah, I've also spent some time working with float tanks. I used to work with float tanks, which I
Yeah.
find particularly interesting
Yeah.
as a sober way of altering your state of consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We have a
that's
different
a
way
whole.
about you. But that's what I'm saying. Like anybody that partakes in a ceremony, journey, has a different way about them when you talk to
Mm,
them. And you just know it because
mm,
they move differently in life and they see things differently, they feel differently, how they speak and the
mm.
reverence for life is very different when you've participated in any of these journeys. But you're like on another level with it. It's like your discussion is like always, it's always like it's like a pause and then there's a saying and it's very like meaningful. It's a pause, a
Mm.
saying, meaningful. There's a question, answer. I'll come back to that. Wait a minute. I have to think about this. Like that's not normal behavior for most people.
Thanks.
That's great. Like, it's thoughtful. You're a thoughtful person. You're
Mm,
very
mm,
thoughtful. Clearly, this has been developed within you. Um,
mm.
it's beautiful. It's actually beautiful.
I can't. I intentionally. Well, I started drinking ayahuasca when I was 20, and that was very intentional because I knew my mind was still forming.
Mm,
Mm. So
yeah.
I knew that ayahuasca was good, and I wanted to see how that would go
Yeah.
in a developed mind. Yeah, I'm happy with it. Yeah,
You're happy with it.
I'm happy at the end of the day. I don't know, but yeah, like sorry, I didn't finish what I was saying earlier. What really hooked me with ayahuasca was yeah, the medicine was great, but it was actually going back home after my first month in the Amazon. So I spent first month, went back home, and it was my relationships that got stronger. Like I don't know what changed there, but something happened where suddenly people made more sense to me and I could give more love. And I felt like they received it. So it was a nice loop. And I love people and I love my friends and my family. So for me, that's a little key to my heart. So as soon as that happened, oh, okay, this is something. I saw you strongly agree with me. I'm curious as to
Strongly
what that
agree.
was. Okay.
Strongly. I think that's one of the best benefits of psychedelic use is the strengthening of your ability to see people in a better light and
Hmm.
to have better relationships. Like seriously, who doesn't want that? Like,
I know,
like
right?
if somebody said, I don't want to have better relationships. Who's ever said that? Like it's of course you want to have better relationships. And this is just such a powerful way to deconstruct yourself and but
Mm,
then come back together and then see
mhm,
people in a better light for that.
mhm. And yourself in a better light, I would say.
Yes.
There's a lot of
Yes.
self-healing that, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting with the maestro. I find it interesting because for some reason, and I think ayahuasca is good for me because it helps me unpack my Western ways of thinking. Because I do work at the university, right? I'm doing my PhD. I'm actually quite grounded in that way of thinking. And I spend a lot of time in that space. And then when I come here, I realize, oh yeah, that's an idea from there that I didn't realize had become like made a home in my mind. But the maestro, he was talking about self-love the other day and how important it was to love yourself. And for some reason, I thought that was a really like Western, almost new concept. But he was saying that was one of his best lessons actually from ayahuasca was like one thing he really learned was to love himself and respect himself and to look after himself and to him drinking ayahuasca, having a good clean diet of good food, that's all part of his self-love. And his little speech was very moving. But yeah, it comes back to myself as
Wow.
well.
See, there's so much
Mm,
wisdom. Like when you speak, there's so much wisdom. And I feel like it's a highway to wisdom. Like a lot of times you
mm,
gain wisdom obviously through being alive a long time and experiences.
mm-hmm,
And it feels it's almost like an expressway to wisdom. It's like you're deepening your wisdom, especially if you're doing you're younger, you're deepening your wisdom very quickly about yourself
mm,
and the world. And obviously you add in the experiences with that. That's great. But I feel like a lot of this is kind of lost knowledge. Like you said, self-love. And that feels
mm,
like it's a Western ideal or like a very pop culture ideal, but it's not
mm-hmm,
though. It's not.
mm-hmm.
It's like ceremony. We have done everything in our power, especially in the Western world, to kill ceremony over the past
Oh yeah.
100 years. We're just killing it left and right. Why do we do that? Why have
Mm,
we decided that ceremony and transitions and life and death are not important? I mean, that's just it feels like
mm,
these medicines help you get back to that the ceremony,
mm-hmm,
the transition from one plane of existence to the next is critically important.
mm. The rite of passage, you might say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. I'm not. I would still say that Western culture has a lot of ceremony. It's just the significance behind it, perhaps in the intention.
Mm.
Because there's a lot of way to hold ceremony. A lot of things we do in day-to-day life are little rituals. Um, but yeah, it's the absence of the spirituality or perhaps the deep aspect. I find it particularly difficult in Western culture to think about not having a transition, a puberty transition, like a formal rite of passage in that way, because a lot of cultures do have that rite of initiation or that way that it takes, for instance, a girl to a woman, or you'd see it more commonly with boys to men. Like they fulfill some sort of trajectory, and then at the end of that they're confirmed men or they're confirmed women.
Right.
Like I find that particularly hollow in the West, is that there is no real formal structure for that, because puberty in itself is quite it's a difficult process for young people. You know, there's a lot going on, and it would be nice, I think, to have some sort of structure to show, and also to almost create strong people or strong society, or people who know themselves or who are grounded in themselves. If you could help during that transitional phase, that makes me a little bit yeah, I think the West needs some sort of rite of initiation in that way that's a little bit more structured than what it currently is, that a 16 to blow out.
Yeah. Oh, the Sweet 16. Yeah. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I think too, like with death, we have a very difficult time dealing with death.
Mm-hmm.
Even discussing it. Again, another huge benefit to psychedelics is decreasing the fear of death or,
Mm-hmm.
acceptance. And I mean, if you talk to most young people, they don't really think they're going to die. I mean,
Mm,
they're like, it's like out of their mind. It's like, oh,
mm-hmm.
that's a long way away, or we'll figure this out or something. And
Mm-hmm.
I always remember I'm going to die, always,
Good.
always. And I think it's important to remember that
Mm-hmm.
because it's fuel. It should push you to accomplish things
Mm-hmm.
and have reverence for the life you're in, for that. But there's like, the ceremony in Western cultures, generally people are dying in not ideal places that they want to be, in a
Mm,
hospital, looking up at a ceiling, in a sterile
mm-hmm.
environment, maybe alone, maybe with some people. There are some, exceptions, like in maybe like New Orleans in the past culture, where they would have parties and celebrations when people died to celebrate their life. But that's very
Mm,
rare in the West.
mm-hmm.
It's mainly actually a fairly sad situation of passing
Mm.
on.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's quite, and there's so much fear around death as well.
Yeah.
Like it's not really accepted as part of the life death and there's also fear of holding on, I guess, or there's
Mm.
something that strongly like people want to hold on so dearly, but there's a point, in my opinion at least, where there's a gentle letting go and a gentle acceptance that this is the next phase of someone's life.
Yeah.
um yeah, but that's a
This is
personal opinion.
crazy. This is all, you're doing this. What you're doing is pretty amazing. Like you're studying something in a very raw and ancient way that I think is amazing. So what's well, who knows where it's going to go for you? I'm sure you have an idea, but like, what would you want to do after your education, your formal education? How do you want to be in this space professionally?
In this space professionally, I would like to continue the research, I think, some sort of research role, whether that's within a formal university institution or perhaps ideally something a little bit more, maybe less rigid than the university. But for me, what works well for me as a researcher is being out in the field and using my resources in that way. Like I love living in the middle of the jungle. There's something about it for me that I really enjoy. And there are some people who love being in a lab. So why don't we work together
Yeah.
instead of trying to be in each other's? Because I
Yeah.
would not work well in a lab. I worked there for like a few months for sure, but level of satisfaction would be, oh, it'd be okay actually. But yeah, so for me, I'd like to continue research because also what I've found with ayahuasca is, and plant medicines in general, is that it's a huge, massive field. It's humongous. And I think there's a lot of time that can be spent researching this. And also a little area that I'm playing into, which is which I've just started actually, is documentaries. I'd like to do more documentaries. Because for me also as a researcher, I love writing. I absolutely love it. Made the blog, so I think that's a little bit more accessible. But academia, in a sense, slightly annoys me because the research is not very accessible. So you need to have a level of education to be able to read the research paper. But
Right.
hey, what if I make a documentary? Can you understand that? Probably.
Oh yeah.
People understand videos, yeah. So to me that would be a nice little side avenue that I'm feeling out right now. So I've got my little camera with me right now actually, and I've started putting together little bits and pieces. So we'll see how that goes after the year's over.
Wow.
But yeah,
That's
just I
amazing.
like it's accessibility at the end of the day.
Right. It's
And
successful. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
We need people like you who like want to actually be in the jungle and want to actually spend their lives focusing in these areas. Like, that's fantastic. Seriously, this has been
Thanks.
enlightening for me, extremely
Mhm.
enlightening. And I have a lot of respect for what you're doing, Rebekah.
Thank you. And thank you for holding such a lovely space. It was such a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm just seeking knowledge, right? You said if people are seeking
Mhm.
something, well, I don't want to mess it up how you said it. They're missing something or something like that, there's something they're missing. I'm missing the knowledge, the larger field of knowledge of psychedelics. I have the experience.
Mhm.
I've talked to a lot of people, but like I look at the gap. I have not talked to someone who has basically studied this with indigenous people, healers, shamans. I'm like, okay, I need that. I need to like dive into
Mm.
that portion. You are my entryway into that. So
Great.
I'm just filling the spaces in. That's all I'm doing.
Mm. I really appreciate what you're doing. I think it's very important work to be done.
Thank you so much. Well, please tell everyone how they can connect with maybe your blog or and ways to. I know you're gonna
Yeah,
be in the jungle and
sure.
stuff, but
Actually, the internet connection in the jungle is better than my connection back home in
no.
Wellington, New Zealand. Yeah. I like one time I was like in the middle of the river and I was getting Facebook notifications. Um, just great.
Wow. Okay.
Well, if you think about it, people have their little farms that are so far away from each
Yeah.
other, so it's actually really
Yeah.
important. It saves people walking for 6 hours to have
Right.
phone tower.
Yeah, it's true.
But anyways, to get in touch with me, okay, so my name's Beth or Rebecca. I go by Beth. So BEK plants, PLANTS. So that's my Instagram handle, my Twitter handle, and then my blog is beckplants.wordpress.com. Um, so yeah, if you want to get in touch, feel free to flick me a message or see what I've been up to. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you. And thanks, Darian. It's been such a pleasure to
Of
talk to you.
course. Of course. I mean, get in touch. Seriously. Everybody, there are a lot of people from the psychedelic community that are going to listen to this and be fascinated by it. I hope as many of them as possible reach out to you because you're doing something different. You really are. Different than most people I've talked to. And everybody's doing really incredible work, but this is a different deal. This is like really at the root of the ancient history of this medicine. So thank you for the work you're doing, and thank you for your time.
Of course. Thanks, Darian.
Thank you.